Alright, it's Suarez, aka Silver Crow, and today we're going to react to Why Joel Have to Die by Whiskey Crooks, called Whiskey Talks too. Now, I do have a personal opinion about this because I have played Last of Us Part 2, and I'll save that at the end of the video. So, for right now, let's get started.
Of 2020, Naughty Dog released the second part of the Last of Us series, and, well, everything burnt to the ground. There was a lot of criticism ranging from reasonable to frankly ridiculous. Complaining about the pacing, absolutely. Having to play as a character that wasn't Ellie and Joel, I totally get it. Or the general darkness of the story just wasn't for some gamers. And then there were complaints of the SJWs, Neil Druckmann pushing politics, and the representation of LGBT characters. Okay, so to be clear, Ellie has a cut in her eyebrow? Come on, how is she not gay? Jokes aside, there was one criticism of Part 2 that far surpassed the others. An event that caused a large swath of players to drop the game and simply refuse to return to it. Less than 2 hours into a 20-hour game, Joel is murdered.
Outside.
We didn't think anyone was gonna show up.
What the hell did you expect? We gotta get out of here before the whole town's on top of us. You're done.
You want what I want, right?
End it. Now.
Joel, get up. Joel, fucking get up. Please stop. Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up. No. And the fandom tore itself apart. Many people who loved Part 1 hated the decision to kill Joel, and I understand why, but here's the kicker. The writers had to do it. They had to kill Joel. They didn't have a choice. The idea of murdering your darlings is a piece of writing advice that focuses on removing unnecessary characters or plots from your stories. Even if they are your darlings and you love them, if you truly want to write a great story, you can't always have nice things. In our case, we can't have Joel. But first, Part 1. A beloved not only video game, but a story so touching with characters so endearing that it didn't necessarily need to be captured in a video game. While the world of The Last of Us was created around the idea of the spread of a deadly fungus that turns people into rabid zombies, the story itself isn't about the runners, clickers, bloaters. It's not about the infected. You can see this in the beginning of the game, in the first real section outside of the tutorial of the Boston quarantine zone, Billstown. Billstown is filled with infected. It starts with a few clickers, some upside down shooting, then more infected in the streets, a graveyard, some houses, and finally a bloater. Once you've killed the seemingly unkillable gymnasium bloater, these infected don't seem so dangerous. As the player, you've overcome the fear of these monsters, and the final truck push section isn't too difficult in comparison. But it's the moments before the truck that start to set the tone for what Part 1 is really about. You find a body hanging in the house you've come across, bites all over it. It's clear what happened. The hanging man killed himself to keep from turning. This man was Bill's partner.
He's got bites. Here? Hey. I reckon he didn't want to turn, so yeah, guess not.
We see how it impacts him, and this is the first time we see the true human cost of the infected. This moment even echoes back to the opening as we saw the first casualty of the game, Sarah, Joel's daughter. The Last of Us isn't about the infected or the billions dead, or even how those left are capable of surviving. It's about the survivors themselves. But most importantly, The Last of Us is Joel and Ellie, their broken lives, and how they find each other, learn to care for one another, and finally find solace. Part 1 works for a simple reason. Both Ellie and Joel's character arcs are dynamic. They, as people, change with respect to one another throughout the story. How Joel can go from this to this.
It's me! It's me! It's me! Look! It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Joel.
How Ellie does much of the same, attacking Joel in their first meeting to being fully open with him in the final scene. This is a core principle of storytelling. Stories without dynamic characters aren't very interesting. Because at the end of the day, what was the point? A human story like The Last of Us needs these dynamic story arcs for their characters, because without them, the story is flat and lifeless. For anyone not familiar with the story of The Last of Us, Ellie is possibly the only person in the world immune to the infection, and Joel has just killed a group of people in order to not only save Ellie's life, but he dooms humanity from ever finding a cure the moment he shoots the only doctor left capable of making one. And then Joel tells Ellie that there were actually tons of people that were immune, and that group didn't actually need her. I feel it's clear that the launch point for Part 2 rested in the final few lines of dialogue in Part 1. Outside their new home, Jackson, Ellie is clear with Joel about what she needs.
You want to hear right now?
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
Joel squares his shoulders, lifts his chin, direct eye contact.
I swear.
He's lying, but he knows in his heart that murdering those people in that hospital to save Ellie's life was the right thing. Ellie's response is a single word,
Okay?
that says more in those two syllables than any other line of dialogue in the entire game.
Definitely.
She's not saying that she believes Joel. In truth, her question wasn't a question. It was a command for Joel to give her assurance. At that moment, Ellie needs to trust someone, and she needs that person to be Joel. She doesn't quite believe what he had told her up until that point, but she's tired. Tired of running from everyone and everything in her life. She wants to try with Joel, so she says,
Okay.
but what she means is okay for now.
Yep.
In a way, Part 2 was a continuation of that conversation. Within the
And here's the thing. I love the duality of both Ellie and Abby. Now, to me personally, could Abby's story could have been done better? Yes. But it's their first time working on that character. And Abby didn't really have really much for anyone to work off of. That is kind of not like her polar opposite, but more of a how Joel and Ellie were. Now, here's the thing, like I said when I explained this to people, the duality between Abby and Ellie was a two-sided coin. If you ever played The Last of Us Part 2, there's a conversation that Abby had with her dad, and after, it's like the conversation after her dad had with Marlene, if I remember correctly, when it was explaining to that the parasite went straight to her brain, and for them to distract that to make the cure, they had to kill her. And Abby said, "If I was you, if I didn't have to, I would tell you to do it." Now, not all people saw it that way, but this is the point of Joel chose Ellie over the world. And I understand that. I understand that, and especially what he have lost. So,
4-year time jump, we learn through the flashbacks that okay slowly starts to fall apart. This is the most compelling piece of part 1. This is what the writers wanted to explore, but how did they accomplish this? By the start of part 2, Joel is a static character. He's set in his ways, he isn't changing. Now, how do we know this? We see this in his dialogue.
I swear.
His raw confidence is on full display, but he also states it clearly in the first cutscene of part 2. He tells Tommy what he's done and doesn't apologize. He has to get it off his chest, sure, but there's no remorse in his words. There's no doubt. The same lack of remorse is spelled out again in the final cutscene of part 2, the flashback on the porch. Joel is a static character. The actions he took at the end of part 1, he stands by in part 2.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
There will be no growth, no reevaluation, no regret. And of course there isn't. He's a father taking care of his symbolic daughter. It doesn't matter what Ellie wanted at that moment because she was 14 years old and doesn't know what's best. He would do it all over again. Sure, the writers could have shoehorned in a character arc for Joel where he sees Ellie's point and maybe he should have let her die. But why? Why put part 1's story and the love they came to find for one another at risk? Why taint that? Part 1 left us with this moral gray area, the moral question of what Joel did. If part 2 answers that question, it strips part 1 of its core theme and the soul of the game. That leads us to the second piece of this. Why did the writers need to murder Joel? Why not keep him in the story? And this is the danger of keeping a prominent character without a proper arc in your stories. Ellie was clearly a dynamic character in part 2. We see her go through the stages of grief, and she goes from this to this to, oh dear God, this.
Jesus.
But finally, we see her find some sense of peace. It's a satisfying character arc for the player. If part 2 consisted of another Joel and Ellie adventure, Joel would be static in his corner while Ellie's character arc would be what brings them closer together. And in truth, the ending would be much of the same. Ellie not agreeing, but accepting of Joel's actions. This is the same character arc as Ellie had in part 2, but if Joel is alive, we'd have to deal with him being a stubborn mule for 20 hours, and most likely get sick of him by the end of it. Joel would come off as a bitter old man refusing to change his ways. Ellie would look weak as she did all the compromising in their eventual reconciliation. The story would ruin both characters. By having Joel dead throughout this process of Ellie's reconciliation, Joel is a martyr, simply unable to change or compromise, and as a result, we forgive him for that, as does Ellie. So we have Joel as our murdered darling in question. We have to murder him. It would be strange to have him as a background character, and he simply doesn't work in the foreground. The second reason why killing Joel needed to happen is we needed a reason to understand Ellie's motives. See, when Joel is killed, Ellie and Dina go to Seattle. This is insane once you've taken a step back. 2 teenagers with some ammo and a horse go off hundreds of miles in order to enact revenge on a foreign group of people they know little about. But we as a player forgive the insanity because it's Joel. We want her to go. We just had to sit through his murder, and we want Abby dead as much as Ellie does. It makes sense. We're blinded by rage just as Ellie is. Even as we get to Seattle and are attacked by an army, completely ambushed by dozens of WLFs, not to mention the onslaught of infected chasing us through the tunnels, the day ends and Dina is not only sick, but pregnant. Why are we staying? Sure, the excuse is Tommy, but he's a grown man who decided to do this on his own. You are 2 teenagers, one sick and pregnant. Why are we staying? Again, this doesn't make any sense without the undercurrent of rage we feel towards the WLFs and towards Abby. I've seen a lot of comments online about how the story would have been so much better if it was Dina who was murdered and Joel and Ellie ran off to get revenge. But here's the thing, and I say this with Dina being my favorite character in Part 2, for the first few hours of the game, who the fuck is Dina?
Yeah.
I'm just getting to know her. She's funny, yes. Ellie sure seems to like her. I'm rooting for the two of them. But if you kill her less than 2 hours into the game, I just don't care. Ellie seems upset, I get it. In her position, I would be upset too. But I'm not in her position. Not like when Joel died. When Joel died, I was square in Ellie's position.
Yeah.
I spent 20 hours with Joel in another game. Dina? A solid 45 minutes.
Yeah.
With The Last of Us Part 2 a couple years behind us, I continue to see this bad understanding of character development and the plotting of stories within the community. It's this lack of understanding of story structure I see amongst gamers that I honestly believe is holding the entire medium back. Gamers need to get smarter if they want better stories in their games. Complaining that your favorite character died isn't good criticism. It doesn't make the game bad or the writers awful. Certainly doesn't justify death threats. This is my plea. If you love the medium of video games as I do, please, let the writers take risks with their stories, and if you don't enjoy them, that's fine. But it doesn't make them inherently bad. Think more critically.
Alright, that is it for this video. Now, I did say at the beginning of the video that I will talk about my personal opinion about the death of Joel in The Last of Us Part 2. My thought was, how did nobody saw this coming? Especially when the trailers were dropping and everything. It dawned on me on the second one that when they showed Joel, like, he's gonna die. We just didn't know when. And yeah, it sucked that it happened in the beginning of the game, but the thing is, the biggest complaint was the story. The story was fine, it's just the second half of that story was kind of because of Abby. Now, this is something that I feel like they were trying to do with Abby, but again, I digress. Now, it's been like, what, 2 years since the game came out? And even till now, I didn't understand the death threats. Literally. But, either way, please like, comment, subscribe to my channel, and like and comment, subscribe to Whiskey Crooks. And, till next time, peace out.